subject that I've been desperately wanting to promote and discuss and try to stew up a little controversy maybe. When I was young, I was absolutely obsessed with epic poetry. Not really Homer, though. There's something about the Odyssey and the Iliad and the Aeneid that never really held my attention. For me, it was John Milton and Dante. There was something about epic poetry that tries to see through the veil of the physical into the divine that always absolutely snagged my attention. Now, I remember my dad, God rest his soul, always kind of raising concern that this stuff was blasphemous. Dante actually gives us a poet descending into hell on a kind of a weird tourist trip to see all the people who are down there and what's happening to them. Whereas Milton goes beyond the Bible to get a look at the fall of Satan and the war in heaven in very explicit terms. And of course, all of this reminds me of a passage in the book of Revelation where they say you're not supposed to add to Scripture. So I understood Dad's concern at the time, but this stuff was just so cool that I couldn't stop. And it's part of the reason why I became obsessed with poetry and literature in the first place. Now, I've always wanted to write an epic poem, but I've never been sure how I would go about even like attempting that. What would I write about? What on earth would even remotely capture people's interest in the modern era in regard to poetry? And then Trump got elected. Now, it's funny because for Milton and for Dante, politics was really front and center to the way that they depicted the divine realm, right? The way that Milton looked at Satan as a kind of fallen leader, the way Dante put the faces of his political opponents on the denizens of hell, popes he didn't like, yeah, they were in hell. People that there's actually an example of someone who was a political enemy of Dante, and he had the explanation that, oh yeah, he's already in hell. The person walking around, even though he's still alive, is a demon that has possessed his body, and he's already in hell. And the person, and so he died a long time ago, but he's still alive. So this, I used to absolutely love stuff like that. So politics is not exactly something that's outside the realm for these poems, right? They always have been political. Now, my plan is to not make this a treatise against Donald Trump, because that it's not even that I don't want to insult Trump or his supporters. It's more that I don't want the poem to be hackneyed and cliched. So if this turns into me putting the face of Trump on the devil, then that's going to be really, really, really cliche, right? It's going to fall apart. And I think even Trump himself kind of knows he's not the master of oration. He's not, this type of person who gets up and does a really awesome rhetorical speech. Although I have to give credit where credit's due. The guy's rallies, when he's in front of an audience that's sympathetic to him, he does kind of have that charisma and that charm, right? So I can't completely take that away from him. But I think having Satan mirror Trump's rhetoric would be just really fundamentally absurd. So my plan instead is to have Satan be the person of charm and the person of absolute power as he's always been. All right. And I want this epic poem to mirror the horror of our modern age. So, and it was always so cool when Milton brought Satan into the four-way. His epic poetry has Satan basically as the main character. So I'm sitting back and I'm like, man, this is crazy. How can I organize all this stuff together? And I said to a really good friend of mine, the night Trump was elected, and again, like as I'm saying all this, I'm not necessarily making direct comment on Trump's policies, rather how unexpected it was and how horrified we were that this person had been elected. And what I said to him was, it's almost like Satan himself won the war in heaven, as if Satan had dethroned Yahweh. That was what it felt like. The shock, the fact that this is something that could never have actually happened, and yet it did happen. That's what it felt like the first days of the Trump presidency for me. And again, you'll notice I'm taking really careful pains to not make Trump a satanic figure, but rather to just kind of emulate the emotions I felt when this occurred. So after I said that to him, I was like, that's a really, really cool idea. And it's just as, if not more blasphemous than what Milton and Dante were actually doing. Yahweh as a figure is fascinating because we have to make the assumption that Yahweh can never lose, that Yahweh will always prevail, right? It's blasphemous to even conceive of a reality where Yahweh could lose. So already at the very get-go, if Satan wins in the war on heaven, and if Satan dethrones Yahweh and destroys him, we're in a universe that is just wrong. We can't wrap our heads around that from a religious context. So I've decided to actually write this monstrosity and to really try to bring this to life. Now, I want to occasionally record some videos just of me reading this text and kind of talking about it, because with it, I call this a vanity project because it is really and truly vain. As I'm not sure if anyone on planet Earth is going to be interested in this. Already at the outset, I will have alienated anyone who considers themselves even remotely religious. Because again, the idea of Yahweh being defeated is complete and total anathema. But the main themes I wish to explore with this poem, this story in the epic tradition, how would Satan, Lucifer, and I kind of want to introduce the idea of Satan, the adversary. How would Lucifer rule heaven? How would Lucifer embrace divinity? What would he become? Would he be evil, or would he be something else entirely? Would he be some other kind of extreme? How would he have won? How would Lucifer, how would Satan dethrone Yahweh? I have a really interesting response for that I am cooking up. And what role does mankind play in a universe where Satan won? Now, as I go through this poem and I sprinkle it with hints of Trumpism, I have to be really careful not to punch this absolutely in the face, right? I don't want to go overboard with it. So the main thing I want to do is just get this idea out there. And I want to see if there's absolutely any interest at all in this. Because part of me is even kind of wondering if there's going to be a backlash. I mean, there's a guy who's writing a poem that is essentially direct and blatant blasphemy. Is anyone going to care? There is a chance that nobody on planet Earth is going to give two craps about this, which would have an interesting comment as well, right? I mean, being on the internet is basically screaming into a vortex. I mean, for most of us, nothing from the vortex ever screams back unless we do something that is horribly offensive, which, I hate to say that that's kind of what I'm, shooting for here. And also, like, I would love to invite criticism, and I would love for people to see what I'm doing and to actually think, oh, I'm going to say something about that. It's incredibly vain to think that that's going to happen, but, one can hope. And part of the joy of doing this is reading the poem out loud and trying to emulate that rhetorical power that Satan had in Paradise Lost, trying to have these quotable lines that Milton just absolutely immortalized. One of my absolute favorites from Paradise Lost, I commit it to memory. When the fallen angels are in hell and they consider continuing their war on heaven so that they could invoke the ire of Yahweh and be destroyed utterly. Is it better to suffer in hell or to be annihilated? And the quote goes like this. So as they eventually decide, no, it's better to stay in existence. Certainly don't want to completely annihilate ourselves. And the quote is, "For who would lose, though full of pain, this intellectual being, those thoughts which wander through eternity, to perish rather, swallowed up and lost in the wide womb of uncreated night." To put together words like that and to put them in the mouth of Satan is just like, oh my gosh, it's so infinitely cool and so difficult to do. And that's what I'm shooting for here, right? Something that reflects our time, something that gives a little bit of a comment, and maybe something that will tick off a lot of people. As you know, again, I can't say full force that I am not playing with that idea. So to close this out, this kind of a ramble, I'm going to read us the introduction, the very, very beginning of my epic poem, The Triumph of Lucifer. It's a working title. I want to release this in books, the way that Milton did, to have book 1 probably be The Triumph of Lucifer, and then book 2 be something like, oh gosh, Rape of the Christ, and to have these really catchy titles that fly in the face of religious, conception. So here's the very first part. There's a lot more that's not been revealed yet. If you would like to read this material, if you would like to check out some of my other work, I'll include a link in the description. And it's totaltext.wordpress.com. All my material is there. And here's the very, very first part of Triumph of Lucifer. For death's flower to bloom in such stark image, for Yahweh's blood to flow where some assume no blood, haunted divine form. The weight fell upon the chests of traitorous children, crushed and racked their eternal sinew. The bated breaths and visions of glory driving their lances rushed at the knowing, instinctual assumption their violence would end in hell's maw. The fires awaited poisoned minds to met justice and Yahweh's assured victory. Glory spoiled, all sense of place and center, rotting in the divine eyes, staring hopeless to heaven's horizon, mouth agape and sunken teeth tinged with holy crimson. The triumphant fingers of Lucifer's hand rip the follicles from their roots. His laugh, deep within a hollow chest, echoes past the ivory gates, chasing the shattered remnants of Yahweh's loyal band. Why fret? Why tremble in terror at what our struggle has birthed upon the heavens? Be ye but men, or the foul scratching in sand, sprinkled haphazard upon the sea's ever-shifting borders. Lucifer brings the holy visage to his own and stares into the vacant eyes. What fear have we now? We shall restore greatness to the seraphim. Heaven will close its doors and prosper. A beacon we build higher and higher to the very zenith of our ambition. Restoring greatness to the seraphim. Make heaven great again. Anyway, thank you very much for, suffering with me through this, and I really appreciate your time, and I hope to bring more of this in the future.